So in the book, we're going to be on page 119. We didn't really spend a lot of time on, actually 118, on the providence of God, the administration that God holds over our world, over His world. And I wanted to just very quickly go over some of those things that we, let's see if this is, I think I froze up here. Whatever that was, I unstuck it. So, providence is that idea that everything that happens in the world is providential. We use that word in discussions a lot. That it is the providence of life that X, Y, or Z happen.
Does that mean the same as predetermined, preordained?
Yes, it is very similar in that God has a providential will over everything. And so He holds everything together through that providential will. Geology and biology and all those different things are held together and purposefully held together by God for His good purpose. And all of that was accepted as the way that we viewed the world until a liberal theology came along that suggested, if you look on page 118, it says 20th century providence had developed into a well-defined doctrine in conservative Protestant theology, but the concept fulfilled an equally important role in 19th century Protestant liberalism. So this was the 1800s, and theological, if we'd been paying attention to dates, you would see there's a theological shift that's going on. We can differentiate between the two types of liberalism with two quite different understandings of providence. The dividing line between the two lay with the infusion of Darwinism, Darwinian ideas into theological thinking after the mid-century. So Darwin comes along and changes thinking because the theory of evolution. If there is evolutionary processes going on, does God really hold providence over His creation? All right, that's the question that comes up out of Darwinism. So it goes on to say, the central characteristics of liberalism prior to Darwin was its emphasis on natural theology. Gilkey noted, from the time of Francis Bacon in the 1600s through the first half of the 19th century, providence was perhaps the most secure tenet of natural theology. Creation appeared to point unequivocally to the providential care of the Creator. That's what we talked about a while ago. Everyone understood. God was in control. Okay? In the words of Gilkey, in the examination of the structure of the world, the physical, geological, and even biological sciences seem to uncover a marvelous fitting together of things to one another and to their environment for their common good. So we could look at everything. So we do this. I used to love watching the National Geographic specials because they would just, all of it worked perfectly, when it would come together. And that was even after the idea of evolution. But we went to great lengths and pains to show how the natural world worked together when it was left alone. Okay? So it goes on to say, Darwinism altered the faith of Protestant liberal theology, but it did not alter the important subsequent liberalism accorded the idea of providence. So this is what this is going to go on to say. Liberal theology says that evolution shows us that God is no longer providential. God has some other role that He has in this, but He's not holding providential control over everything. And the Protestant liberal theology said, oh yes, evolution just shows the tool that God used in His providential knitting together of all things. So there was a division, but the idea of evolution was accepted by both by both sides. One just saw it as removing God from any providential reign over life, and the other saying, no, this is what God uses to maintain his providential control. That happened in the 19th century, about late 1800s to the early 1900s of the 20th century. All right? So, but what happens at the beginning of the 20th century? World War I. And so for the first time in human history, the entire globe is witnessing destruction on a scale that it's never witnessed before. And it involves nearly every country on the planet, from Australia to Greenland, to the Far East, to the Middle East, to the Western country. Everybody was involved in this conflict. And once everybody was able to see the kind of destruction that man could unleash, come on in.
Hey, hey, man. How you doing, brother? Good to see you, man. Amen. All right, hello. All right.
So, yeah, we're on. Y'all gonna have the same book? I don't even know. You got the hardcover.
Yeah, the hard copy. It's different page numbers, but it's
Yeah,
the same.
yeah, we're in. It's in chapter. It's the Creator God chapter. I think that's chapter 4, and we're looking at the section under Providence of Liberal Theology, if you can find that.
Okay.
Anyway, we get to actually the destruction of providence. How can God be in control? That's the question that would be asked to bring an end to God's providential reign over creation. And the reason why is now man has engaged in a war by its own design, by its own construction, utilizing the natural world to create these instruments of death, and they brought so much of it in a very short period of time that the question began to be asked: can God be in control? Now we ask those same questions when we see something evil happening in the world. That's one of the questions. If we don't ask it out loud, we keep tucked away in the back of our minds. How is this a part of life that God has providential control over? And we've discussed it a little bit already, but we need to kind of cover the ground again, because we all know, and even the Bible speaks of this, very often for something good to be brought forth, it comes through an episode of pain and suffering. And the one that God uses often in the Old Testament, he uses the illustration of childbirth to show how there's this extended period of pain. And I've only been with one family with one birth where labor was 21 hours.
Holy mackerel.
And the thing about it was this girl had already said she was having a natural birth. So it was painful. I mean, and I wasn't in the room. I was just outside the room. So you can see where maybe this was common in the day. You could experience that longevity of pain in order to bring about something that was new. Well, that's the way God said once we entered into a life of fallenness. He even says it in Genesis chapter 3. It's gonna be painful to be who you are made to be. If you're male or female, it's going to be that way. So we look at it that way, but we're going to look at it a little more deeply, okay? Because it is a question that has to be answered, especially when that war ends, and within less than a decade, there's already talk of another one, okay? And within 15 years, we're at it again, until finally, it ends in what? The worst destruction we've ever seen with the atomic bomb. Okay? Talk about taking the natural seedbed of life, the atom, and using it to destroy the world. See? So, when you look at the idea of providence before Darwin, everything in the world was fitted together nicely to what? To give a place for God's treasured creation to live. Okay? And so all of it, biblically, we understood to be a glory to God. And then almost in an instant like this, it all comes about and is turned on its head. And so you would understand people asking the theological questions of providence. Well, why is it gone? And for the most part, it was destroyed, the idea of God's providence, in every realm of life other than the church. And the church was not able to answer its own questions very well. One of the things that we were talking about a while ago, he said, God is in control. That's a comfort statement to make, but we really have to understand why that is. Because somebody's going to come up to you and say, why in the world would you say that? And you got to be able to give them an answer that's going to make sense to their question, not just sense to your faith. And that's what this whole exercise is about. We want to be able to give, we want to make sense to their question, not just offer them a testimony about our faith. If that's all it took in the world, we'd be okay. You know? But we have to know more because the questions become deeper and deeper, which we're going to look at here in just a minute when we get to chapter 5. So, as we carry on, the next section is there, God's administration of His world. At the third paragraph under that, it says, on page 119 in my book, at its foundation, the doctrine of providence seeks to capsulize a fundamental Christian affirmation concerning the relationship of God, the Creator, to the world as His creation. To describe how this is the case, let's look again. We've already looked at these subheadings and look at them in a different way. So preservation is the first. Asserts that God continually sustains the physical universe in existence. Okay? So pre-Newtonian, easy to believe. Post-Newtonian, we've uncovered the structure of the universe. So is it really God that sustains all things with His hand? Or is it gravity? Okay? And so this became the question, because Newton's laws are Newton's laws. I mean, they're infallible. Except here recently I read an article about where someone has challenged one of Newton's laws and has been successful doing it. Anyway, we've always held that God held things in His hand, but after Newton, the old physics were gone, and it says the classical understanding of preservation has likewise lost credibility. Yet this does not mean that all concepts of divine preservation of the world are obsolete. On the contrary, and if we look over to the next paragraph on page 120, it says, more vital to us today than the purely physical understanding of God's agency in preservation is the confession that God is the one who preserves us in the face of apparent meaningless of existence. So here we have the broader question. Instead of dwelling on God's providence and what am I trying to remember here? Preservation. Instead of dwelling on the preservation of creation under God's care, we can see the universe hanging in the balance. Okay? And so if you wanted to be a Protestant, if you wanted to exercise Protestant liberalism, you could say, well, in the same way that God uses evolution to bring about creation, God uses the laws of physics to hold things together, which is, to me, it's no problem for me. You know, God is a God of order. He doesn't just helter-skelter do things until you go figure it out. I mean, there's order to these things, all right? But when it comes to, and I like the way he puts this, the apparent meaningless of existence, now where is God providential? Is there anything about life in the material world and our ability to live in it and manipulate it that can bring us absolute meaning and purpose to our life? Is there anything that we can reach the end of in this world and say, this is the ultimate in the human existence? No. And I always like to use the movie Citizen Kane. If you've ever seen the movie Citizen Kane, it's supposedly about William Randolph Hearst, who can never have enough. He can't conquer enough. He can't have enough wealth. He can't have enough influence. It's just totally everything about his life. It's opulent and it's obsessive, and yet it's meaningless. So, what do we do if God is preserving creation, and we already know how creation works in the heavens and elsewhere, or we believe that we know. We've settled on it in some sense. Then how is it that God goes about maintaining meaning and purpose for our life? And that no longer is a question that can be answered by the classical sciences, maybe other than anthropologists try to make a poke at that. As they study the human race, they sometimes believe that they figured out the meaning of life. And we're going to look at some of that in the next chapter, outside of an understanding and appreciation of our relationship to God. So, it says, hence, when we confess God as the agent of preservation, we are providing the divine answer to the question, is there meaning to life? The question of meaning arises both with respect to the existence of reality as a whole and individual existence. Okay? So, what does that mean? The answer arrives not only within ourselves, but also the experience that we have around us, outside of ourselves. Okay? And that otherness that we're longing for ultimately is our
If we
Creator.
acknowledge there is a Creator, that's our purpose. Now we have a purpose.
That's right.
So,
Yes. The acknowledgement of it, but also the revelry in it, the thriving.
because with evolution, even if you acknowledge it and it was true, what purpose does that give you? Where are you trying?
Exactly.
That's cool and
Yeah.
all, but
Yeah.
there's no reconciliation to that at the end.
And when it goes haywire, what do? Where do you go? And we know it goes haywire. You know, we see there's examples all through the natural world. And then and the other thing that comes out of evolution and natural selection is what? The survival of the fittest.
Which makes sense to step on others to get above.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
Social Darwinism.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you?
But then the question becomes, why do we have doctors? Hey, if you hurt yourself and you die, you're just one of the weak ones. But in our desire to have power over life, then we say, we can do something with that. We can repair that. We can fix that. We can do this. We can do that. But if you followed the law of the survival of the fittest, there wouldn't be a cancer doctor on the planet.
That's true.
Yeah, because you're one of the weak ones. You should the cheetah should be culling you out of the herd. Okay. So, but we don't do that. We don't allow for that. Why?
Is that because we're modeled after God? We have that compassion?
That's what I wrote a paper about in seminary. Is that where does that do no harm come from? If once we have the survival of the fittest, well then the harm is just in the way that nature takes care of its own or destroys its own. But we do something about that. That is compassion. That is a means by which we're able to say that the weak have the same opportunities that everyone should have, regardless. That's the Bible. That's the Old Testament.
So that means a lot of unbelievers are operating under that and they don't even realize.
A lot.
A lot.
Yes.
It's just medicine. That's just medicine. Really.
Why would you
And I would argue that you're wasting it.
It's
Yeah.
all money. It's all money.
Yeah.
You see what they're doing
It's
to
all-
That's
children?
true.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's terrible.
Why would anyone do that?
I know. So now you're describing, this is what really will drive you
All
crazy.
money.
You take something that is about doing no harm, and it's flipped over, and it is all about money. But we're going to get to that because this next chapter opens up with having to deal with that terrible flaw in the way that we've sometimes choose to approach life. So the preservation of life comes, and it goes on in contrast. And let's see, preservation constitutes the Christian answer to the question of meaning of a whole. We confess that God provides the only ultimate meaning of creation. In doing so, he prevents the universe and its history from slipping into meaninglessness. And then we discover, in order to do that, sometimes there is pain and suffering. And so we accept what God must do, and we also accept that as his created beings, we have a particular power given to us by God that allows us to either bring about creation or to destroy it. And so even though he is providential in his activity around it, it may be that the providential action of God is quickened by our inability to follow his lead, to exercise what we believe. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
When we believe that God is providential and yet we act another way, we've set the whole system up for failure. Okay? How do we believe that God's providential, but we must do this in order to accomplish X, Y, or Z. All very high motives, let's say. Let's say it's all for the greater good, let's say. We believe that. But it goes against God's providential design that he has for the world. Then we've left ourselves in a quandary because we don't know how to go to God, because we've already said that this is somehow or another for the higher good, which we would automatically assume would be a part of what God would be doing. If you see. So we go to war sometimes with high ideals. And we can talk ourselves into believing that it's a godly thing to do that.
Yeah.
When all the while we're undercutting the true providential nature of the gospel, really, at that moment.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful. The other one is concurrence. If you see that, it says, like preservation, the classical understanding of the second subheading of the doctrine of providence, concurrence, was based on a now outmoded medieval physics. Concurrence is the cooperation of the divine power with creaturely powers, allowing or causing them to act as they do. So this was the old way, the medieval way, that God was at work in some sort of way manipulating things in the world so that it would be exactly like he wanted it to be. So you can imagine all the different superstitions that would rise up out of that kind of understanding of God. Okay, so that's what was going on. Classical Protestant thinkers transferred the concept of to the realm of will, which is what we discussed earlier about meaning and meaninglessness. They spoke of concurrence in terms of an ever-present and ever-acting divine will continually giving assent to or causing the actions of human beings, whether these be good or evil. So, concurrence would be that God's will is at work. And it's going to be working in our lives, and we're either going to do what he wishes for good, or we're going to do what he wishes for evil. Okay? And whatever his reasons are for that really weren't important. The important thing to understand was that if there was evil and suffering in the world, it was at God's hand. And we go back to Job. We can go to Job and say, why? Well, God, what Satan did in Job was call God into question. Right? He said, look, if you don't provide Job with good stuff, he's not gonna worship you. You take care of him. Your will's at work in his life. Your providence is at work in his life. But you take all those things away from him, he's going to curse you. I mean, that was the challenge. Of course, it doesn't happen that way, and Satan has to double down, and it doesn't happen that way. Okay, but that was some of that. So, in this particular thing of concurrence, we can look at that and say, well, God allows that kind of thing to happen. Okay, so that for whatever reason, in Job's case, it was so that we could read by reading of Job's life that glory and honor to God belongs to him always. Okay, so those that look at concurrence, they would say the same kind of thing. Good or evil, we're praising God. You know.
Amen.
And so that's a good thing. But in the way that it's always been viewed, that the foundation for that has been eroded several times. And we're under one now. We're going through an erosion of this idea that God is acting concurrently with events in the world. Despite the intervening shift in worldview, our faith in God of concurrence remains meaningful in the contemporary situation. More crucial than the understanding of concurrence as the permissive or causative influence of the divine will on human wills is the relationship of our confession of God as creator to the question of ultimacy. In the final analysis, concurrence is faith's answer to the question, who is the ultimate? Who is ultimate in the world? That would be God. Okay. So once God is ultimate, can anything else be ultimate?
No.
No. Is there any other will or purpose that can rise to that place of ultimacy in our life?
No.
So if there is an idea of God acting, it's not because he is acting concurrently with things. He is ultimately transcendent. All the words that we use to say that he is the ultimate of all things. And so certainly it is all operating under him.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to look as we get into this next section how we as created beings respond to all of this. Because we can sit here and talk about this. We've been doing this now for how long? And we talk about it almost in a theoretical sense. Because we encounter the glory of God in various ways in our lifetime. We'll encounter the evil and suffering in the world in various ways. And because we have been brought up or have been introduced and influenced, given over to a relationship with God, especially through Christ Jesus, everything that we experience has a different hue to it. And it's very difficult to separate. It's difficult to do, and I don't know how often we would want to do that. Separate ourselves from that sort of activity with God, except in those moments when we have to try to help someone else understand whose eyes are closed. And we need a more objective view. And it's difficult for us to have that. So the more that we understand the way they are viewing things, the easier it is to have that objective view, because you can kind of get behind their eyes and see what they're seeing. That's why guerrilla evangelism, I call it, where we're just going to hit somebody quick with the gospel and move on. Most people I know have way too many questions for that to be effective, especially today. So we have to just do better at knowing kind of what's going on in their head. We go on under government. Not only we affirm preservation and concurrence, but we also continue to acknowledge the third classical subheading of providence, which is government. When we assert that God governs his creation, we are expressing our certainty that God will bring both the world as a whole and our lives to its final good. So we have evidence of this in Scripture. Revelation reveals to us that there is a finalness to everything, and that at the end God wins. He's there, and there's a new heaven and a new earth. Which the first hint there is the one that we have, that we're so desperately trying to make home, isn't going to be around. So we have this hint at the very end of all time. It's like shining a light back and saying, hey, this is what you need to be looking for, like the searchlight out at the harbor. This is where you need to look. So we have this confidence of God governing things, knowing that is going to come to its fullness. We're not always as confident about that for our own lives. And sometimes, I think the reason why that is we have a construct in our mind as to what our life is to be. And we kind of measure things that happen in life according to our own construct. Okay, when it doesn't happen that way, we feel like, well, it's never going to happen. And you get to my age and you realize I've been using the wrong ruler. And so I got to go find the right ruler. And then I find out, well, you know, God's got a construct for my life. And I can find, he will reveal that to me. He's promised that he will. And so for most people, when we can kind of grasp the whole thing of creation and how he governs over that and how that's going to come to its ultimate end. But we have more trouble with it on our own until we find that place of contentment with what God has designed for life. I always, and I think of Mother Teresa was one of those people in my lifetime that I just looked up to so much because of how simple she was, how wonderfully educated she was, but never beat anybody over the head with it or anything like that. Met with presidents, met with all these different people, and had such great influence. And she was a teenager when she heard God say to her, "Be my light." And she knew it as clear as a bell that that was God's voice. And she didn't know what that meant, but she knew that that was going to be the guiding instrument for her life. And she never heard another word. That was it. She, in her biography, it talks about it. And if you want to get her biography, it's called "Be My Light." And so her whole life becomes the fulfillment of that one thing that she heard from God. Okay? So my point in offering this is that she had ears to hear, and she heard it. And then there was this clarity about her life that came about as a result of that. And she could not have been more of a human being because of that, see. Augustine was the same way. He was a partier. He chased women. And God got a hold of him. And in an instant, Augustine knew everything what his life was to be. And everything that we enjoy about Augustine's life and his teaching and his wisdom and all was because he had this defining moment with God. The Apostle Paul, another. And if we had volumes of biographies sitting here, we could find many more people who it's like once you know, you know, and that's what. So that's the way. When we talk about governance, God lays out the path, and when He lays out that path, He provides the guardrails. He does everything that you need in order to accomplish that, if we're paying attention.
Yeah.
And very little in the natural world is able to do that for us. In fact, what we're going to look at next in chapter 5, we're going to go over there now, is the human identity and the origin of God. And in this section, we're going to look at a thing. Let's see, where is it? Called the concept of openness to the world. Openness to the world. And it becomes a very important idea. We're going to talk about that tonight anyway for the rest of the time, probably. But in this next section, we're crossing into a different section now. And that section is about anthropology, or the doctrine of humanity. We don't always think of there being a doctrine of humanity as we talk about the doctrine of God and understanding God. But we can't understand God without understanding our relationship to Him as created human beings. And we've talked about some of this, but in relation to into who we are, how we're made to be, the way that we interact with the world, how much of that is God, how much of it is discovery of God, how much of it is wasted when we spend our lives examining things that have little or no consequence to life, like knowing how to count cards or something silly like that. I'm just using that as a silly example. But how much of the natural world is there that is available to us and our natural intellect? our natural sense of compassion. What happens when all of that gets twisted and perverted? You know, where do we go? Do we do like the prodigal son and come to ourselves and create a whole new existence with God, or do we continue in the order of things that we've managed to discover and create for ourselves in the natural created things of this world? So we're going to look at that first. We're going to look at this whole idea of the concept of openness to the world, and then we're going to look at what how general revelation of God begins to help us overcome that. So if you want to look in the book, at the bottom of page 127 in the paperback, it's the third paragraph in the opening, the human identity and our origin in God. It says, our foundational identity arises from the fact that our ultimate origin lies in God. This is what Christians believe. Okay? We are creatures of the one whom Jesus declared is our Heavenly Father. So we're not only, our origin lies with Him, we have a unique and special relationship that He affords us because of His Son Jesus. As God's creatures, we can know our origin and our destiny. In so doing, we can begin to understand who we are. So if you know what is this? You know where you've come from and where you're going, then you can have an understanding about who you are. The example I just gave of Mother Teresa is a stellar example of that. She knew where she had come from, and God revealed to her where she was going, and everything about life lined up for that, so that it had full meaning and full purpose. It goes on to say, this origin and this destiny, and consequently our identity, are linked to our place in the creation that is God's handiwork. So we don't enjoy, this relationship that we enjoy with God, as knowing where we begin, where we're going, the relationship we have with Him as Father and child, all of that takes place here in this created space. Meaning that none of this is some spiritualized existence that we have. Everything that God is working through us, the relationship that we have, is meant to be carried out in creation, so therefore it's naturally going to have an impact in creation, either within the people that we meet and have impact on, or even the world that we live in. So Adam and Eve started out to be good stewards of creation, and that hasn't changed. It may not have the same kind of effect that it should, but it doesn't mean that it hasn't changed. Now, we're going to look at how the openness to creation has gone haywire in our day, okay, and how we've kind of lost control over that. And you see it every day, and we're going to talk about that. So our place in creation, if you see that heading, it says, our identity lies in the connection between humankind and the material universe. That's obvious. Those things are constantly changing, though. Humankind and the cosmos is changing. And the pre-modern answer to our existence is what? We love this passage, Psalm 8, 4 through 8. Psalms describes us this way. What is man that you are mindful of him, the Son of Man that you care for him? You made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You made him rule over the work of your hands. You put everything under his feet. Now before Hebrews adopted that passage as a prophetic word for the Messiah, the psalmist and others, they would read that passage, and what was this? This was the heightened vision of man. Okay? Who we are as the human race is just barely below the angels. Okay?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's hard.
So we think about that. He says, little lower than the heavenly beings, and crowned him with glory and honor. Okay? This is where we really become separated from everything else. Who receives glory and honor?
Our God.
And he's crowned who with glory and honor?
Christ. Us.
Yeah. So we hold not only a kinship through Christ, but before then, God views, the psalmist is saying that God views us with glory and honor as it relates to everything else in creation. Now certainly not in heaven, because our realm is not in heaven. Even when this was written, there was not even an idea of going to heaven when you die. You went to the place of the dead. But until that day, we were crowned with glory and honor here in this place. So a special place, a special relationship with the rest of creation. The modern answer to all of this changes things. If you look under the modern answer in the second sentence there, it says, according to the modern worldview, we find our identity not in any supposed status as creatures, but in our activity as creators. Okay, so we're identified in what are we able to do with the world that is around us. So what would be the shining example of this at the turn of the century was the modern industrial age that comes upon us. What was it?
The car.
Yeah, the car. You took natural resources and you were able to take them and manipulate them and control them, and you could make things. And it had been going on for a long time, but the modern industrial age did what? They mechanized the production of that to where people became more like machines than they did like people. They just had a place on the assembly line. And so here we go. The idea that we are the creators, and there were others that could just become part of our creation. So subservience and oppression was built into the problem, okay, that we were creating for ourselves. But the modern idea was that we are able to have this kind of activity as creators. And look, I marvel at the things that a man can create. I mean, it's just and can dream of. Yeah. That phone that could right. That's a computer that could send you to the moon. I mean, it's all you can hold in your hand. It all is amazing, but then we have to look at, does it have any meaning really to our life? I mean, we can lay down and say that I can call anybody I want to in the world if I have a number. Anybody in the world I can call. Okay, but when I lay down my head at night, has it eliminated one bit of angst from my existence? We're right back to the writer of Ecclesiastes. Vanity of all vanities. I got everything under the sun. It just has no meaning and purpose at all. But this is the modern way of looking at things, and we were happy with that. Okay, even though we created 2 world wars and split the atom and put ourselves under threat of total annihilation for multiple years, multiple decades. Even though we went through that, we were still willing to take the risk in order to be the creators. See? So that was the modern answer. In the postmodern era, it says, we move on to the postmodern era. This is the second paragraph there in that section. Many voices are crying for a revisiting of the modern worldview. No kidding. We are hearing increasingly loud calls for a new understanding of ourselves that would see humans not as separate and above, but as an integral part of the environment in which we live. So postmodernism says no one's in control. Because there's no, if you're not over things, if you're integrated into it, who's in control? There is no control. We eliminate God out of that. Okay.
Pure anarchy.
Yeah. So what do we have? We have a world that believes that your truth is truth, and that my truth is truth. But if we disagree, then what happens? Either one side gets very angry and oppressive, or you go to your separate corners and never speak to each other again. Does that sound familiar? It sounds like the world we're in today.
The opposite of reconciliation. It's
Yeah. Now take global warming and the whole green energy and green everything, we've entered that there integrates men into the system of environment, to where now, in order to have any impact on it, we can't lord over it. We have to do something within it. Okay? So we have to become less of an impact, is the idea. Because you're not over it, you're in it. See the difference?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay? Think about sexual identity. I no longer have to be the sex that I was made. There's not even biological tenets over my life. I integrate myself into the environment the way I choose. Okay, that's postmodern thinking, and we're going to look at this openness to the world and see how, for some people, they think this is how it's supposed to be. So we have to be able to ask those people the right questions, because they're not budging. They're as religious about what they believe as I am religious about what I believe, really and truly.
Especially people born into that. They don't know. How do you tell them about
Have no idea.
How it was before.
that this
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so see, it is important to be able, how do they know? The only way they know is to ask the right questions. But so few Christians don't even know how to ask the right question, because we're not prepared for the answer we might have to respond with in the process. So we're doing this, and we think this is fun to talk about, but it has practical value in our world today. It goes on to say, the changing culture, this is the last paragraph under that modern answer section, the changing cultural context demands that we articulate anew and afresh the biblical themes concerning the identity of humankind within a universe which is God's handiwork. What does this mean? We need to be able to tell people and address the concerns people have about their own life in relation to the truth that it is God who is over all things. Our challenge is to search out a theological answer to the question of human identity. We must develop a specifically Christian response to the question of identity, which has perennially troubled mankind, or humankind, and which is being raised with a new vigor in our changing context. Who are we in relationship to the world around us? That's what we've just been talking about. Okay? So, there was a movement came underway about the middle of the 1800s called theological anthropology. Everybody knows what anthropology is. It's the study of the human race. An anthropologist, Margaret Mead, was a famous one back in my day. They studied all these different tribes and cultures and around the world, trying to determine what is the true human experience, what's the true human being. And of course, you find different cultures and different everything, and those that have tried to find the common denominators, they don't last for very long. They may stand on their feet for 15, 20 years, and then something else comes along and it kind of slips out of their hands. Okay, but theological anthropology was a system of study that tried to do the same thing in relation to the human race in relationship to God, and how was that a universal experience? Okay, it's not a very widely practiced type of study as much as it was 150 years ago. But one of the things that come out of all of this is this concept of openness to the world. All right, so we're going to look at that right now for as long as we can. The findings of contemporary anthropology have led certain thinkers to the concept of openness to the world as encapsulating the basic situation of humans in the cosmos. So the openness to the world is trying to define human beings within creation. One proponent of this approach, Wolfgang Pannenberg, defines openness to the world as the unique freedom of man to inquire and to move beyond every regulation of his existence. existence. Now,
Meaning there's no boundaries.
that's right. The unique freedom. I think they may have cut me off.
Is it Zoom?
I think that oh, there we are. I've been cut off before, so I know what it looks like. So what he describes as freedom, okay, is actually our free will. It's innate in us. When we think of freedom, we think of it as being guaranteed by God or by the state. The state provides freedom because it is an inalienable right that we exercise as creatures created by God. So I just want to make that clear. This is a thing that that the freedom portion of it is not anything that we claim for ourselves. It's a thing that's innate in us that we misuse. Okay. So as this definition suggests, the phrase "openness to the world" refers to the uniquely human ability to experience the environment always in new ways. Okay, so we make tools so we can experience creation in various ways. There's all sorts of things that we do in order to be able to enjoy every bit of creation that we choose to. Okay, but then it goes beyond that, because what is our identity in those things? We always seem to come back to who we are. We can manipulate the things that exist in the world, but what do we do about who we are? And that becomes always the big question. That was Solomon's question in Ecclesiastes. What in the world am I here? Who am I?
Yeah.
And he had everything. Okay.
It's the people that push the boundaries the most that are the most miserable.
Say again?
It's the people that push those boundaries the most that are the most miserable.
That's correct.
The
That's
ones that
right.
say, no, I'm non-binary, I'm the opposite of everything.
The opposite of everything.
They're the most miserable.
So they have to tear everything apart in order to discover who they are,
And they
which
don't.
is exactly the wrong thing to do. Yeah.
Because it's, I think, the job of the devil to create confusion, to take us away from faith, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly
Always
right.
creating confusion for everything.
For everything.
So you have to be rooted in the Bible, you have to know it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So let's go on. Let's see. If we look at, there's a big long quote in there I'm not going to read from Ashley Montague, but after that it says this: the biologically based plasticity and adaptability of the human species gives humans an edge over other living creatures. This is true. More importantly, it also lies at the foundation of our lack of a biological home in the cosmos, meaning this: if you're constantly, by some sense, motivated to destroy the place you live, then you'll never have a home. You're constantly in the process of changing it. You're never satisfied. Home by definition is to be a place of settledness and peace.
Yeah.
And for many people, this isn't it. And for us, it's not. But for different reasons. Because we are adaptable, we enjoy the unique possibility of experiencing the environment always in new ways. This is what's meant by the openness of the world. So if you are always experiencing things in new ways, then how can you ever be satisfied with life? Okay? Our openness to the world also raises the question concerning our function in the universe. Other living beings have a discoverable niche in the biological framework. The human identity, in contrast, cannot be answered definitively by reference to biology. We cannot find a specific biological role that explains our purpose or existence. So the question is, why are we here? What is my biological role? Just to have babies? I mean, is that the only function that we have here? And so we begin to find other meanings for life. because that's good, but it only goes so far,
Yeah.
right? Openness to the world also suggests that as humans we enjoy the possibility of transcending any finite ordering of our environment, any world we create. So what does that mean? If we're transcending over any finite environment, that means we have control over it. Anything that we choose to create within that is ours to control. So we find ourselves doing this on a global scale with all sorts of things, thinking that we can maintain the natural order of things when really we don't even have a clear understanding of it.
Yeah.
But we have that freedom and ability to act. And so there are those that seize on that freedom and ability, even if it's at the cost of others. Because there's this whole justifies the ends thing that is always dangerous. This is linked to our ability, I already read that. In the tradition of Hegel, the German thinker, Max Scheler speaks of the spirit as the source of the capacity of each individual to elevate himself above himself as a living being and, as it were, from a center beyond the spatio-temporal world to make everything, including himself, an object of his knowledge. It means even that in this openness to the world we can elevate ourselves above ourselves by means of whatever that we decide we can do that by. Spiritually, intellectually, emotionally, we can begin to recreate ourselves. Okay? If we move on down, because of this transcending capacity, humans are never completely fulfilled by any one achievement or by any one transformation of the world. Rather, we are continually on the move to something yet undefined. That is to say, humans are never completely satisfied with the present. We are always seeking the new, the future, the not yet, that which surpasses the present. We are continually shaping and reshaping our environment in an unfulfilled attempt to create home for ourselves. We sense what Arnold Gahan calls an infinite obligation. So what is he saying? This idea of openness to the world creates what in us? Frustration. We never can achieve.
And society propagates it. Advertisements,
Everything.
shows, media.
Everything. So you
Gotta
hit,
have the newest, the best, the latest.
that's right.
Yeah.
So why do you imagine that is that we have chosen on such a scale to follow this idea, this openness to the world? Because we see it in almost in everything now, especially this whole biological reconstruction that's going on. Okay, we see it in the whole climate change thing to a large degree. We are going to threaten the existence of human life in particular places on the earth so that we can have control over this. It's an openness to the world.
I think it's self-centered, I think, in a way. 'Cause
It has to be, doesn't it?
We're feeling good, we're doing something,
Yeah.
we're propagating something instead of being subject to the creator.
I had a friend. He was a missionary, and he said at Christmas time we worked at a housing project together, and people would always want to come and bring Christmas gifts at Christmas time to the little black children. You know, that's where we worked in. And he said he'd tell them don't bring them. He said you're just trying to soothe your own pity glands. He called it. You're not really concerned that you'd be here all year. See, and this is the same kind of thing. We're going to open ourselves up to the world so that we can do what we wish to do with it in order to fulfill us, which we're never fulfilled. We never reach that point if it's just this. And the world is living in just this. Yeah. So what he calls the infinite obligation, it means that we go on and on being obligated sometimes only to ourselves to have this world that we've created. And we don't care who else is in it, and we don't care who else it hurts. This is what openness to the world does. So I want us to really get a clear understanding of how this is working. So it goes on, the theological significance of the concept that we're talking about. Some contemporary thinkers have ventured a theological interpretation to the basic anthropological finding by appeal especially to human adaptability. Our openness to the world, the authors of these studies argue, points to what may be called the infinite dependency of humankind. Because we are open to the world, we are dependent on some reality that transcends the finitude of any expression of our world. So what he's saying is, there are some theologians that take this openness to the world and say, see, it just demonstrates our dependency and that we're constantly looking for something outside of ourselves. But their argument seems to be, we've got to live in this state of destruction, self-destruction, so that we might somehow or another come to an understanding of our dependency upon God and seek Him again. I haven't witnessed that in my life. I've seen flashes of it in individuals' lives, but on a scale of the human race, which is what we're talking about here, anthropological ideas, I have yet to see any culture come to a place of total suffering and devastation where they turn to God in my lifetime. I can't say it hasn't happened. Jonah preached a 7-word sermon and all of Nineveh repented, but that's about as close as I can get to anything like that happening. In fact, what normally happens is that in our lifetimes, when those things have happened after catastrophic events, there's less looking to God. Mm-hmm. So we don't recognize our dependency. Although it's infinite, it's never going away. How did he describe that? Infinite dependency by humankind. Now we understand that as believers we do have an infinite dependency upon God. And He loves us so much that He's carrying us into infinity with Him, so that we will be constantly under His care. So in a sense it does translate, but we're not looking for a total sellout to the openness to the world in order to get there, which is what this seems to argue for. And I think that's why Grinch brings it up, so that we can kind of draw this.
It's crazy because it's like you're not guaranteed they'll even make it through that devastation. They won't live through whatever they go through.
That's right.
To come to the other side.
But they may not see it as devastation. So when you've decided that you're a man and you want to be a woman, and the world affords you that decision, you make that decision freely, and you're doing it out of your own sense of self. Okay, but then you get that done,
You're stuck.
and you hear all these stories, people that well, that wasn't the answer. So now what do I do? What do you do? I mean, now you've got an entirely different set of realities that you've got to deal with until the day that you do meet your Maker. I mean, so and yet we're the haters. We're the haters when you can see as clear as day that this is not. It's not just a thing, this one isolated thing. This is a movement throughout humankind, where this is the choices that are being made. When you look at socialist or communist structured countries, the entire thing is based upon a hierarchy of man that is manipulating every little detail of life, okay, to bring about an end that they've decided should be the end. And it is all openness to the world. Everything that is going on there is this, I can be whatever, we're going to make it exactly the way that we can make it because we're able to do it. And that's kind of the way, communist China works. The leaders decide, and they're doing it not based in anything other than they're able to at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, where's the real value? When we see it, have whatever you want if you got 60,000 slaves, doing your work or whatever.
Then when that
You
leader
can't.
dies, it's like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. So then again, the more that we gotta go. The more that we drill down into these kind of things, the less compassion the world is able to show, because you're working out of your own truth. Okay, so if you choose to do that, and then in the process you need my help, I don't know how to give it, because I'm not in your world. I can't get into your truth. I only have one truth. And so that's the only one that I have to offer. And until they're ready to see outside the world they've created, they're really not interested in what you hold as true. And as long as they're open to the world, it will constantly find a way to satisfy. So let's talk about the whole sex change thing and this gender identity, and you believe you're a woman, so you're a man and you become a woman, and then 10 years down the road your life's a wreck and you don't know what to do. So how do you find fulfillment in that? Well, you become a spokesperson against it. And so now all of a sudden your fulfillment is being anti-something, because that's the only way your life is ever going to have any fulfillment. And that's not really fulfilling. How long can you be the dissenting voice before that's no longer fulfilling and you have to do something else? And you, whatever it is, choose X, and maybe that'll help me find an identity in myself.
Yeah.
So you see how this helps me have at least an appreciation for what many people that we encounter are going through, and we know that they're never going to find the answer on their own.
I wonder if Bruce Jenner will ever,
I don't know. He went through all of that, and
Then he said that he shouldn't have done it, right?
I've never heard
Something
him say
to
that,
that
but
effect.
well, he hinted. He never really did say it. I think what he intimated to was it wasn't what he thought it was going to be.
he did say that. That's right.
Yeah. It wasn't what he thought it was going to be. But the interesting thing about him was he had the extreme left, socially and politically, behind him in doing that.
He's very.
And when you hear him talk today, he's very conservative.
He is.
yeah.
So it's almost as if that whole thing, the fulfillment level reached its peak and that was it. And he had to shift in order to find another fulfillment level. And that's probably going to fade and shift
It's
too.
like
And,
an itch. It's just scratching you.
yeah. Yeah. So the whole thing with the swimmer, he's had his 10 minutes of fame, and when he's not swimming anymore competitively in college, where is he going to find his fulfillment? Who knows?
Yeah.
Because the whole world is there and he's free to do whatever. And he will say that I'm being fulfilled, but ultimately it won't be. So they chase their tail,
Yeah.
or like the tiger circling the tree until it becomes a pool of butter. There's just nothing left. And then
But the world will praise you for that. That's self-exploration, and it's so good,
yeah, see, the world likes that because it gives credibility. It gives some, they believe, some sustainability as to what they're offering, or what the world is offering through this openness to the world type of idea. Because as long as you do that, guess who you're keeping locked out of the room?
Yeah, that's right.
It's diversion.
And you never
Diversion.
feel bad about what you're doing because there's no rules.
Yeah. And if someone opens their mouth and might cause you to think some other way, you're going to call them a hater and get them kicked off of Facebook or whatever. You're just going to eliminate
The
it.
principal at his school, remember?
Walker High School with the principal.
The prom.
Oh yeah.
They
Same
kicked
thing.
him out.
Yeah.
Facebook jumped on it and
Yeah.
Kicked whom out?
Well, back in earlier in the school year, they had a school dance,
Mm-hmm.
homecoming dance,